Hello, everybody. Welcome back to day 2 of developing effective individual language acquisition plans. I'm one of your co-hosts, Melanie Junkins, multilingual and bilingual education specialist. I'd like to just review today's learning objectives. Again, this is for session 2. And so our overall goal of our learning series is posted here. Today's session, though, will specifically address assessment and instructional strategies and scaffolds that are found within the ILAP. I know you all are probably sitting at the edge of your seat for these today. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague in the Office of Teaching and Learning, Jane Armstrong.
Hi, welcome back, everyone. Really excited to see you and have today's session 2, where we'll be talking specifically about the assessment component of the ILAP, and we'll be looking at the instructional strategies and scaffolds, as Melanie explained earlier. And a bit of a connector from yesterday's discussion. This graphic is from the WIDA collaboration bulletin, which is linked here and will be available to you in the Google folder later today. And so this is a powerful graphic that just shows this shifting of paradigms as language as universal. So when we think about how we want to think about the integration of language with content, that it is a shared responsibility. And sometimes, pictures say a lot. And so many of us maybe worked in the paradigm on the left. And so how do we shift? And how do we build on what students and teachers can do? What are you already doing to support this paradigm shift? And where are our growth edges? And I think that's a big part of the ILAP, which is where can we be sharing the responsibility of this plan, because you are not the sole teacher often to be working with students in this context. The other piece that we wanted to share with you today was our multilingual learner data dashboard. And this dashboard is very helpful because it really does show really about highlighting the pieces around the proficiency of not only English language proficiency, but also other assessments like our state assessments. And as you can see here, right now our ELA and math scores are here that you can see on the far left side of the frame. And really what's notable is the columns, the data for current multilingual learners, the center column of exited multilingual learners, as well as our non or never multilingual learners. And so really what's notable is that you will see that exited multilingual learners have historically outperformed students who were never identified as a multilingual learner in English language arts. And right now at this point from last year, it's a 13% increase. So I think that's really important to highlight here because that is something that sometimes we don't share that narrative. And it's really important that we are looking at where are we succeeding? Where are we seeing growth? So that 13% in 2025 of MLs outperforming never or non-MLs is something to really think about. So we want to be thinking about assessment as a snapshot. It's a snapshot. It's a one day in the life of a student as well. So it cannot tell the whole story, but it can highlight discrepancies. It might highlight trends. It could lean us into questions about the conditions that exist behind the data. So for example, what might we learn by looking at the data if organized by grade levels, by regions of the state, by students with or without IEPs, also by students' length of time as a multilingual learner? We wouldn't expect a student to meet state proficiency levels when they are maybe in the second or third year of their multilingual programming. So this gets back to knowing who our students are linguistically, and through this asset lens can set the stage for understanding appropriate trajectories for proficiency in state assessments, as these are in English. So this gets into the critical role of an ILAP and how they are a collaborative tool to ensure that students can access and fully engage with grade level content and activities, while again, going back to that earlier slide, simultaneously acquiring English language language proficiency. So we invite you to go and use this data dashboard to look at statewide, but you also can look at your own local data through the data dashboard, as well as the QuickSight data dashboard that the Department of Education's data team provides. So these are available, and we wanted you to be aware of those. So for today, we're excited to shift us into session 2 of individual language acquisition plans, and looking at the structures of collaboration and instructional planning to make effective individual language acquisition plans. So Melissa Frans, Teacher Leader Fellow, who was with us yesterday, as well as Rebecca Carey, Teacher Leader Fellow, are both here, and Melissa will be starting today's presentation. So I will hand that over to Melissa.
Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So today we're going to start off talking about assessments, that section 2 of the ILAP that we looked at yesterday. And thinking about that this ILAP can be adapted and fit to your district's context based on the assessment measures and data that you collect. So it doesn't have to necessarily look like this. You can totally modify it. And thinking about, yesterday we talked a little bit about compliance and moving from compliance to implementation. So compliance is the basic transferring the data from the data system, just transferring it over into your ILAP. But implementation is really about how are your teams utilizing and contextualizing multiple data points to inform your instruction and monitor your students' growth. And how are your teams building their data literacy to really understand what the data means in context to other data points and how your students are performing in class every day beyond just annual assessments. Thinking about what are your progress monitoring tools that you're using. And also, how do you correlate your district's curriculum assessment data with state assessment data for multilingual learners within the lens of their English language proficiency levels? And thinking about how you're contextualizing your multilingual students' progress and thinking about their progress compared to their true peers who are multilingual learners that have arrived in similar timeframes as them, who have similar experiential backgrounds or cultural or linguistic experiences. Thinking about those true peers for defining expected growth and measuring adequate progress. Also considering how does the ILAP inform your teams in determining accommodations for those classroom and state assessments? And also specifically, how are your IA teams being supported in utilizing specific accommodations for WIDA language proficiency assessments? Are your ESOL teachers part of those IEP teams to support the decisions around how multilingual learners with disabilities participate in the summative assessment of their language proficiency, addressing their disability-related needs? I'd like to invite you to go ahead and think about what are the progress monitoring tools you're using in your schools to track multilingual learners' academic and linguistic growth beyond the annual access or alternate access assessment. What are some progress monitoring tools you're using? So as we know, all multilingual learners, kindergarten through 12th grade, have to participate in annual English language proficiency assessments. This is required by federal laws built into ESSA. And in Maine, we utilize the WIDA access and alternate access for ELS. For your multilingual learners, they start standardized assessments in kindergarten. So please, if you have multilingual learners with disabilities, you want to ensure your IEP teams are considering those appropriate accommodations and assessment participation for your multilingual learners starting in kindergarten. I know for English-speaking students, we typically aren't having those conversations with IEP teams until 2nd grade, preparing for those standardized assessments in 3rd grade. But we really want to set up our ML students for success beginning in kindergarten if they need those additional accommodations to show what they can do on that assessment. And for our multilingual learners with significant cognitive disabilities and that meet the criteria for alternate assessment via the IEP team process using the state guidance resources, and that would also participate in the other Maine State alternate assessment suite. Those students would participate in the WIDA alternate access, which is also for grades K through 12. So for our annual English language proficiency assessment, I mentioned we use access and alternate access, and we briefly touched upon that yesterday, with the exit criteria for students participating in access being a 4.5 and students participating in alternate access 4.0. WIDA has taken a lot of steps in building their and developing their test process to incorporate universal design principles to increase accessibility for all test takers. And they did that built on the understanding that all multilingual learners have diverse learning needs and styles, and that they're all capable of making progress toward English language proficiency. And so here you can see the continuum of these universal designs built in for students. So we have the general principles, we have administrative considerations and universal tools that all students can access as they engage with the assessment. And then we have specifically designed accommodations for each test that WIDA has designed that are only available to students that have an IEP or a 504 plan, and those will be determined by their teams. So for teams who are administering your English language proficiency assessments, Portland and across our district, in each building is a variety of roles that take on coordinating the assessment. So our WIDA, you can see here, WIDA accommodations checklist. This one is for the WIDA Access online assessment. When you are administering training for your ELP assessments and administering your assessments, you want to rely heavily on your accessibility and accommodations manual. It has the guidance that teams will need to determine accommodations specific for each test. And this is where ensuring, and especially for our administrators present, ensuring that ESOL teachers are actively participating in their IEP team meetings for multilingual learners that are dual identified, because they're the ones that are going to be able to come to the meeting really thinking about access and alternate access participation and how students are engaging with the assessment and what assessment-specific accommodations should be in their IEP. And so it goes beyond just our standard. Oftentimes we have ESOL teachers trying to translate standard assessment accommodations in an IEP to what transfers to WIDA assessments. And we want in students' IEPs, those assessments to really reflect their language proficiency status as a multilingual learner, so that we have the specific WIDA accommodations documented. And here you'll see the WIDA alternate access accommodations checklist. And if you notice, there's only 6 accommodations here. So Jane, could you go back to the previous checklist quickly? Thank you. Here you can see there's 8, 9, 11. So a decrease in accommodation. So going back to the alternate access checklist, there are fewer accommodations here because of the universal design and adaptive considerations that are built in specifically for multilingual learners with significant cognitive disabilities. This test is a 1-to-1 administration on paper. So there is a separate training module, it's a different assessment procedure and scoring that you would do for the access test. So it's really important for students, or for, teachers that are working with, or educators working with MLs with significant cognitive disabilities, that they, whether they're administering that assessment to the student or not, that they're familiar and have taken the training module so they can help interpret and analyze those results, how they relate to the student's IEP, and how they share those results out with families. So it's helpful when the whole team can take part in that, whether it be access or alternate access, the training modules, so they're familiar with the test expectations and how to report out on the results of the tests. And again, for alternate access, you need to utilize the state guidance resources for MSAA eligibility. So if a student is eligible to participate in alternate assessments, that means that they will take the alternate access assessment. And if you believe students should be taking alternate access assessment, that means they have to participate in Maine State alternate assessments. So moving away from summative assessment and thinking about a collaborative assessment system that supports daily instruction and student learning, thinking about collaborative assessment characterized by multiple sources of evidence that's provided by multiple stakeholders, contributing to the overall picture of what students can do and what direction educators can take. And that's rooted in collaboration and rooted in building off from multilingual students' assets, which we heard Rebecca talk about yesterday. And thinking about how anchoring our assessment systems and our students' assets can underscore their rights to a culturally and linguistically responsive and sustaining learning experience. You'll see that graphic for collaborative assessment for multilingual learners and teachers. That's a book written by Andrea Honigsfeld and Margot Gottlieb. Andrea Honigsfeld has a whole suite of books on collaboration. So if you'd like to learn more about building your collaboration practices in your schools and your districts, she is an excellent resource depending on the topic you want to learn more about. So looking at the next section, Section 3, English Language Development, differentiation strategies. And I know sometimes, for those of you, if you're using Elevation, which we are in Portland, we use Elevation to create our language plans. They call them classroom accommodation. And my goal is to shift our thinking around accommodations, because that can have multiple meanings depending on your role or perspective of what accommodations are or how students can access them. Really thinking about these things as instructional strategies and scaffolds. What are the supports our multilingual learners need to have in place for them to access academic language and academic content in general education classrooms? Scaffolds and supports change and should diminish over time. And the goal is not more is better, right? The goal is to really thinking about what is the age and language proficiency level of the student? How are they using supports in the classroom, in their instruction and classroom assessment? And how's the team documenting and assigning them before testing so that students are utilizing them daily in their learning so that they can access them on assessments? So ideally, we're not checking all the boxes. We're really thinking about what are the few that are going to be essential for that student to be able to fully access their learning. And one way we can ensure students are accessing their learning is through universal design for learning. Universal design for learning, or UDL. It's very familiar. It's been around for a while. Powerful framework that empowers educators to create inclusive and effective learning experiences for all of our students. And thinking about how we can apply these principles and guidelines to content so we can ensure that all learners can participate in meaningful and challenging ways. And so I think today, I know we have a lot of educators and we have administrators with us, and a challenge I would make to our leaders here, whether you are in a identified leadership position, or if you assume leadership within your team or your school, is how do you build that culture of responsive pedagogy and instruction so that universal design for learning, while we know it's beneficial for all students, we recognize that it's crucial for some of our students, and it has to be in place for our students to access their right to learn. And so you're right, they are not specified there. In fact, the ones there are for summative assessments, and there's an asterisk that says they cannot be used on the WIDA assessments. Your school and district, you can adapt your ILAP to include those WIDA accommodations checklists. And really that is likely more pertinent to the ILAP for your multilingual learners, specifically those with disabilities. or perhaps you're going to include both checklists for the Maine assessment and the WIDA assessment. But yes, just for accommodations on WIDA are just for students with an IEP or 504. They have to be determined by their team. They have to be documented in the IEP, and then they have to be reported out to the assessment office for them to be able to access those accommodations. And there, the Office of Assessment has just redesigned their webpage. It's excellent, has awesome resources and information there based on the test, whether it's access for kindergarten, or access for 1st through 12, or alternate access. They have an excellent timeline there with resources for webinars and office hours for during the assessment window. So there's a lot of information, and that will be linked in this slide deck. And you can reach out to that office. They're very responsive, and they can provide more information around that too. Here we're utilizing another excellent resource, Unlocking Multilingual Learners' Potential. And this, if you haven't checked it out yet for ESOL teachers, is an excellent guide to making content accessible for our students. And here they defined a scaffold as a temporary support a teacher provides to a student that enables the student to perform a task they would not be able to perform alone. Thinking about scaffolding as a dynamic process is targeted and responsive to our learners' performance and their needs. And we want to have a gradual withdrawal of support. It's framed around the transfer of responsibility. So our goal with scaffolds are really that we're not selecting them and appointing them to our students. We're working with our students to figure out how do they learn best? What do they need to access instruction? So they can internalize using those scaffolds, and then we can eventually peel them back as they no longer need them, and helping them advocate for themselves when they use them and when they no longer need them. And building on that previous slide of scaffolds and using that same resource, the authors talk about scaffolding as macro and micro. So thinking about macro scaffolds as strategically planning, teachers having a long-term vision with clear learning goals for their students and sequencing lessons that build students' cumulative and coherent body of knowledge. And micro scaffolds being those instinctive teacher moves that are spontaneous, happening during interactions between students and teachers in the learning. And looking at that cycle, scaffolding, these steps can be used when scaffolding a unit, an individual lesson, or an activity. And you can see if, as you go through these, they're intertwined with our ILAP components and they build on that collaborative work. And then again, they are most effective when they're implemented within that framework of collaboration with colleagues and students. And they're embedded in the strengths-based approach with multilingual student assets as the foundation for learning. So we keep seeing that common thread, collaboration and student assets.
So I'm sure that you will see the connection between the two most recent slides that Melissa introduced, along with this one and the following. We're staying with that same theme of looking more deeply at instructional scaffolds and strategies for students, and exploring deeper in the breakout room that I will be facilitating, organizing your scaffolds or classroom strategies in your ILAP based on instructional materials, instructional practices, and instructional groupings. So we'll be taking a deeper look at that, and with the idea in mind that the template that is provided to you through the DOE is just a starting place. And as Melissa mentioned, as a team, we are working on evolving and revising that document so that it is hopefully more useful. But also we welcome you to do that in your own setting so that your needs and the needs of your students are met through your ILAP template. This is another way that we'll talk about organizing your instructional scaffolds for collaboration and communication when you are developing your ILAP and adding information. This is a way to look at it through the WIDA lens of the modes of communication. So what are you providing for students to support learning through scaffolds in terms of their English language proficiency levels in interpretive and expressive language areas? So both viewing, listening, and reading, and then representing, speaking, and writing. And how do you design and implement scaffolds and strategies that support student growth over time in these areas?
Highlight some resources here that were specific to today's the series today around assessment and instructional strategies and scaffolds, knowing that both of these slide decks from yesterday and today will be available